3 minutes till we're actually going live. We just have, we'll tell you when we're actually jumping in.
So I should like swear and be really offensive now?
Totally. Say all the things you don't say like on PR calls right now.
But truthfully, it's like, it's a scary thing to... It's so we're live. Happy Ballentine's Day, everybody. I know it's actually a couple days late, but in spirit, it's Ballentine's Day here. Actually, today is our first day in the new studio. I can't pan around. Maybe you can go to camera 2. You can kind of see it. I got a crow here. I got the trees, got the spooky vibe going. But it's great to be here. I want to say thank you all so much for buying tickets to this event. I know I was in the Happy Ballentine. And now the audio's picking up in here too. I know there's people in France, in the UK, I mean all over the world that are tuning into this event. I was in the chat earlier, and it's like people are up at like 2, 3 in the morning for this. So I can't thank you enough. And of course to the folks in the USA, thank you as well. And thank you to Moment for hosting this event. As I said in some of the promo material, I've been wanting to do a live event for some time, but truthfully, it's like, it's a scary thing to go live. But I actually always tell my daughter, because we go to water parks sometimes, like indoor water parks, and she's always scared of going on the biggest rides. And I tell her, you got to do things that scare you, because those are the best things in life. And so I felt like I had to live up to it and just start sending the live stuff. And so today is my first one. And so thank you all for making it possible. But I'm not here to do a long, drawn-out opening. I am here to do live storytelling, which is really the reason why you all are here. And so the way this is going to go is I'm going to tell a series of relatively short stories. I have a habit of saying something's going to be short, like this cold open was supposed to be like 1 minute, and it's already 2. But they're going to be relatively short. There will be one news story that no one's heard before. It's going to be a part of these early short stories. And then the finale of this first hour here is going to be my personal story, which is a ghost story. According to the internet, polls we do about the type of content that we produce here, that story, my personal story, remains, the most talked about and oftentimes cited as the scariest story that I've ever covered. And I've covered literally hundreds of scary stories. And so for that one to be ranked as the top is saying something. Also, fair warning, there is going to be one story in the early going, and I'll give you a warning, that is, it's relatively graphic. So for the young viewers out there, I'll give a warning before that one. But the rest of the stories I've chosen in order to be, family friendly relative to being a MrBallen story. So sit back, throat punch the like button, and let's get into the stories. So the first story is called Soft. So in the 1970s, there was this young couple, this young guy and a girl who were out on a date. They were in Utah at this restaurant, and the date wasn't going very well. They got along perfectly fine, but they just weren't vibing. It didn't seem like there was going to be, let's say, a second date on the horizon. And so as they're cleaning up in the restaurant and getting ready to leave, the guy, sensing that, this is likely not going to lead to another date, decided he would just suggest something that he might not have otherwise. And so he said to his date, to the woman, he said, hey, instead of just going home after this, would you be interested in going on a walk with me? This is nighttime, okay, nighttime, out in Provo Canyon. There's this canyon in Utah, this beautiful canyon, loads of walking trails, scenic overlooks. It's gorgeous. And this guy, he was a rock climber, and he went to Provo Canyon all the time, even in the night. So this guy, this is his stomping ground. And he's telling his date, again, this is their first date, that, don't worry, it might sound like a bad idea, but it's beautiful. We got a new moon tonight, so there's good visibility, and it'll just be fun. It'll be adventurous. And so the woman, his date, initially is kind of a little bit taken aback at the suggestion, considering how the date had gone, not well. But, she just thinks to herself, okay, fine. You know what, that sounds interesting, let's do it. And so right away, the dynamic in this first date totally shifted. It went from being kind of stilted and awkward with no sign of a second date to like they're out of this restaurant, they're in their car, and they're excited. Like this is a cool thing they're going to go do. And so, they drive from the restaurant the short distance to this parking lot at Provo Canyon. They park, they get out, and they hold hands, and they begin walking towards the trailhead that's going to lead into the forest that they're going to take. Now, this trail, it's well marked. It's a relatively wide trail, but it goes directly into the forest. And so despite the visibility from the moon, this is a nighttime hike, or nighttime walk through the woods. So they're holding hands, they're making their way down this trail. And, the guy would later say that even though this was an area that he knew extremely well and he went there in the night before, this night, when he was walking on this trail, he immediately felt a sense of dread that he had never felt before on this trail. And actually the woman would later react to this moment and would say the same thing, that she had this intense sense of dread about being on this trail. But being, a new couple, so to speak, or being on their first date, they were both kind of, they didn't want to tip the other off that they weren't into this idea, because before they were so excited, this is their adventure. And so the way they handled this is, despite feeling like I don't really want to be on this trail anymore, they just kind of like stopped talking and began kind of walking faster and faster down this trail. So they're holding hands, they're walking along, and then suddenly the guy steps on something, and he would describe it as being something soft, something that shouldn't have been in the trail that he steps on. Now it's too dark, it's very dark there, and at the moment he steps on it, now remember, they're feeling this sense of dread. They haven't told each other, but they're feeling it. The second he steps on it, he comes to a stop, an abrupt stop. He's kind of on edge to begin with. And when he stops, he's holding her hand, and so she stops too. She doesn't know what's going on, but she stops as well. And before they can communicate, they hear like a rustling sound in the bushes off to their side. And like the combination of the sudden stop, the feelings of anxiety they had already, and now this rustling sound, their reaction to this was the same. Without saying a word, they turned around. They didn't inspect the ground, nothing. They turned around and they began speed walking back out. So they have no idea what's just happened. They don't know what's made that sound. They've turned around and they're hoofing it out of Provo Canyon. And so they get back to their car, and nothing happens to them. They successfully make it out of the canyon. And in fact, when they got back to the car, now that they were safe again, it was exhilarating. They didn't know what happened, but it was like that feeling you get when you get scared, kind of like why a lot of you tune into the MrBallen channel, because there's something to be said for feeling scared. It's a shot of adrenaline. And so as it would happen is, following this seemingly kind of meaningless thing that happened out in Provo Canyon, it actually brought the two of them together. And they went from being a couple that had no chemistry in the restaurant to actually getting married. And so this couple, they end up getting married. And years later, like 10 years later, that was in like mid-1970s. This is like the tail end of the 1980s. It was probably 1988, 1987. And this couple, this married couple, they're in their home and they're watching TV and they're flipping through the channels. And they come to a channel where it's a reporter. And this reporter is doing this interview with a death row inmate. Now, this was like a special, maybe it was on Dateline or something, but it was like a big deal. They immediately sensed that whatever was happening in this interview was significant. And the reporter, after they've tuned into this channel, the reporter asks this death row inmate, prior to being arrested, because obviously this person was arrested, was there ever a time where you almost got caught? And this death row inmate, he would pause, and he would say, yeah, there was one time. Back in the mid-1970s, I had just killed someone out in Provo Canyon, and I was trying to dispose of her body. I was on this trail in the middle of the night, and out of nowhere, this couple comes around the corner and walks up, and the guy steps on the victim's body. But for some reason, the guy and the girl just turned around and left. I only had time to leap into the bushes, and I just hoped that they didn't see me. Well, it would turn out that couple in the 1970s had accidentally stumbled upon one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy, who before he was executed in 1989, he confessed to killing 30 people, but it's believed his body count is significantly higher, but 30 is the number. And so that's the first story, and actually there's kind of a bonus story that comes with this one. There was another story that I thought about doing as the first story, but it's so similar to the first. So here's a bonus story. Also in this is the late 1970s. This is a totally separate story now, but you'll see why it's paired with this one. In the late 1970s, there was a medical student in Chicago who, he was finishing up his classes and he was getting ready to leave for the night. And at the time, in the late 1970s, hitchhiking was totally appropriate, totally socially acceptable. And this medical student had done that before. And so he leaves his, the building he was in, he goes out to the street, and he puts his thumb out, and he, begins to hitchhike. And at some point, a sedan rolls up, and it's this middle-aged guy who pulls up alongside. And the medical student would say that the driver, this guy who's going to give him a ride, seemed totally normal. And so the guy pulls up, says, hey, you need a ride? And the student says, yeah, thanks. He hops in, and they take off. And then shortly after departing campus, the driver was supposed to make a turn onto a road that, led to this student's house, but the driver just continued on. And this was not like a, whoops, I didn't see it, I'll turn around. It was pretty obvious at the speed they were going that this was intentional, at least in the student's mind. And so at some point, as the student is realizing that they've missed the turn, he turns to the driver and he says, hey, you missed my turn. Feel free to drop me off right here. I don't mind walking. You don't need to turn around. But the driver, who to that point had been nothing but normal, he had an expression on that was kind of sinister. It's like he wasn't, he's just kind of menacing looking. And he turns to the student and he says, oh no, you're coming with me. And so at that point, the student realizes that, yes, like this is a very bad situation I'm in. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know who this guy is, but I got to get out of this car. Got to get out of this car. And so the driver is just driving along. He's not said anything else to the student. And at some point when he began to slow down, now let me say that they were not stopped. They were still driving at probably at least 20 or 30 miles an hour. The student opened the car door and jumped out of this moving car, thinking that that was the only way, because this threat that this guy has given him, it seemed very real. And so he leaps out, and he manages to, not really get badly hurt besides getting scuffed up from leaping out of a moving car. And he gets up and he runs home, and he doesn't see this guy again. The driver, he's gone. 2 years later, I would also say the student, when he got home, he was torn because he thought, I need to tell someone about what happened. But he was like, all this guy did was he gave me a ride and then made a threat, but didn't really do anything. I don't have a good description of him. I would know him if I saw him, but I don't really know what he looked like. He seemed pretty average. I don't know the license plate of the car. And there was a little bit of like maybe shame that he allowed himself to fall into that position. And so the student just opted not to tell anyone. He just kept it to himself. And so anyways, 2 years later, the student has moved on in life, and he's in a cafe. I'm not sure where, but he's in a cafe, and he's listening to the TV behind him. And at some point on the TV, a reporter, so you'll see the similarities in these stories, a reporter is just, talking about this death row inmate who began removing the handles, the inside handles of his car after his first would-be victim had leapt from the moving car. And this reporter is citing that this would-be victim was in Chicago. And so the medical student hears, these buzzwords, and he turns around, he runs to the TV, and as he does, on the TV pops the image of this death row inmate that the reporter is talking about. And it's John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, who killed 30 or more boys and men in the Chicago area and then stuffed their bodies into a crawl space in his basement, which he called the Clown Room. And this student, when he saw the image of this guy on screen, immediately he knew that was the man who picked him up. And he, the medical student, was the would-be first victim. It was only because he leapt out of the car that he was not the first victim of John Wayne Gacy. So, those are the two serial killer stories. I'm going to hop in the chat just for a second here. I'm not going to go for long because I missed the first 15 minutes. Already this is going long, so I hope you guys are ready for a longer than 1 hour show.
Yo, Johnny. These are super fans here. They're true fans of Strange, Dark, Mysterious. First 5 minutes, they're like, Bundy. And then they know these stories very well, which is great. So they're super fans.
There we go, dude.
And then they called out Gacy as well, which was interesting.
That's it. Yeah. You guys, you're killing it. And if you didn't know this, that's actually my manager and the CEO of Ballen Studios. That's Nick Witters. He's hiding behind. There he is.
Hey guys.
There he is. That's Nick over there. He and I are ride or dies, building our strange, dark, and mysterious empire. So everybody say hi to Nick. Okay, well, hey, for the sake of time, because already I'm just way going long. I told you it was going to happen. It's happening already, but that's okay. And also, I do think that one of the things that I was thinking about when I was choosing these stories is, in the early days, which I think many of you obviously were tuned in back in the day, like in early 2020 when I first started making content, I covered really kind of incredible stories because I had all the stories to choose from, right? Like I had never covered anything, so I have anything to choose from. But I don't think I did as good of a job as I could do now on telling those stories just because time and experience. And so part of my thinking with this live show was I wanted to take some old, like, call it fan favorites or stories that I thought were really interesting and kind of tell them again with more pizzazz and more strange, dark, and mysterious stylings. So that was the emphasis on this. The next one, I think a lot of you will definitely know, but I think that in the world, when people ask me, what's a story that I've told that's really memorable, there's only a few, believe it or not, that really come to mind right away. There's my own, which I'm going to tell at the end, the finale of tonight's show, and then there's another one that, again, a lot of you will notice, but it's one of those stories that is so strange the way it happens, but you can relate to it so completely. It's a heartbreaking story, but it's one that I think is fascinating, and so we're going to get into it. So the next story is called The American Dream. So in 2004, there was a young man named Mitch who was in his final semester of college in Louisiana. And in this final semester, he met this wonderful woman named Kayla, who was also a senior at this college. And so initially, Mitch, when he saw Kayla, he knew right away that this girl was different. It was love at first sight, if you will. And right away, Mitch is hitting on Kayla. He's putting on his charm. He's really trying to win Kayla over. And Kayla is just kind of a reserved young woman, and she's not really buying into Mitch's charm. They're being friendly, but it's not really going anywhere. But for months, Mitch is, he's putting his whole energy really into trying to get Kayla to see him as a love interest. And eventually it works. He convinces her that he's a guy worth taking a chance on. They go on some dates, and before long, they are a pair. And so, after they graduated, so they become a pair in the senior year, final semester, they become a pair. And then after they graduate, they move into an apartment together in Louisiana, just a little apartment together. And at first, they decide they're just going to focus on their respective careers. They're going to, live together, but really the focus is career. And so they do for a couple of years. They're really career driven, but in the evenings and on the weekends, Mitch and Kayla are making sure they're having their, date nights where they stay in and watch a movie or they go for long walks or something. But, it's very career driven. But by 2006, so 2 years after their graduation, Mitch at his job was becoming so successful financially, and so was Kayla, but really Mitch, because he was getting promoted like mad, they were able to move out of their apartment and get a house of their own. And also that year, Kayla gave birth to their first child, a beautiful little girl. And then a couple years later, in 2009, Kayla gave birth to another child, their son. So they have 2 kids. They live in this house in Louisiana. Mitch is very successful, and in fact, he's so financially stable that Kayla, who really always wanted to stay home with the kids whenever she had kids, was able to do that. And so, they're living this American dream. They own a house with a white picket fence, literally, with the green grass outside. It's this perfect life. So, and I would also say too that a key part of this perfect life is that Mitch he loved his kids. Like, he was really a devoted father more than anything else. And one of his favorite things that he would do is in the mornings before he would head off to work, he would sneak into his kids' bedrooms and he would, watch them sleep and give them a kiss on the head. And then in the evenings, he would, rush home so that he and Kayla could play some games with their kids and just spend time together. And so, again, he's living the American dream. And by all accounts, Mitch specifically is really, he's being the perfect guy, the perfect dad, the perfect husband. He's that guy. So shortly after his son's birth, Mitch is home and he's on the couch and he's watching football on TV. And Kayla and the kids, they're out for the day, so he's alone. And so Mitch, he's sitting on the couch, and as he's watching, at some point, the lamp in the corner of the room, the normal lamp, the red typical lamp, just suddenly caught his attention. He didn't know why, but he looked away from the TV and he looked at the lamp, and there was just something off about this lamp. He couldn't quite place it at first, but there was just something drawing him to this lamp. And as he stared at this lamp, he realized the lamp was blurry. That was the way he described it. It was blurry. Not the light, not like, at night when you're driving and the street lights get blurry. This is like, plenty of light in the room, and the actual lamp, like the base of the lamp, the shade of the lamp, it was blurry. And so nothing else in the room is blurry. And so Mitch, he rubs his eyes and he's like looking at this lamp again. He's still sitting. He's rubbing his eyes and he opens them and he can't seem to focus this lamp. And so he's thinking, how? I've never had this happen to me before. And so he pauses the TV, turns off the TV, and he walks over to the lamp, thinking if I get closer to it, it'll come into focus and it'll be fine. But when he got closer to the lamp, he got up, walked over to it, it remained blurry. And so he's like touching the lamp, he's turning it off and on, and no matter what he did, this lamp just remained blurry. And he's looking around the room, nothing else is blurry, it's just this lamp. Now, when we think about this story ourselves, we would like to think that in this moment we would immediately say, something's wrong with me, I'm going to go seek out medical attention. But in reality, we will go to great lengths to not do that, to convince ourselves that things are okay. And so this is really what Mitch did. He ultimately shrugged off this blurry lamp and said, you know what, whatever, it is what it is. And he went and he sat down on his couch, he turned the TV back on, and just continued to watch football. But over the course of this football game, even though he's trying his best not to look at this lamp, he can't help it. He just keeps glancing over at this lamp, and it's still blurry. And at some point, towards the end of the game, when he looked over at the lamp after one of his, many glances, the lamp had changed. Now it was not just blurry, but it was also now upside down. And he had not touched the lamp. He had not walked over and manipulated it. No one else is in the room. He's alone. And he's looking over, and suddenly this lamp is, upside down, resting on its shade, still blurry. And so it was at this point that Mitch started to wonder am I having a stroke? Am I having some sort of medical emergency? Is that what's happening? Is that the reason I'm seeing this lamp upside down? Like this isn't normal. And so, you know, he sits there and he's wondering what to do about this lamp. And in fact, really what he ends up doing is instead of doing anything, he just sits on the couch and stares. He's transfixed on this upside down lamp. And then at some point that night, so now the game is over, he's not paying attention, he's just staring at this lamp. At some point that night, his wife and his kids, they come home, and as soon as he hears them coming in, Mitch makes this decision that even though clearly something's wrong here, he's not going to tell his wife. In fact, he's going to go out of his way to completely ignore, you know, whatever is happening here with this lamp. And so Kayla, the kids come inside, and Mitch manages to kind of pull himself out of this trance. He stands up, he greets his wife, his kids, and he has a totally normal evening, you know, playing games with his kids, and everything is as it should be. But that night, after his kids and his wife, they go to sleep, Mitch, there was just something calling him to go back down and look at this lamp. And so secretly, you know, he left his bed in the middle of the night, you know, left Kayla in her bed, and he snuck downstairs and he sat on the couch and just stared at this lamp, which was still blurry and upside down. Now, he's not trying to do anything to it. There's something in his mind telling him, you got to look at this lamp. And so he's looking at this lamp. That morning, the following morning, Kayla gets up, she comes downstairs, and she finds Mitch on the couch in the TV room. And, you know, she has no idea why he's down there. This isn't something he normally does. And so she naturally says, you know, Mitch, what's going on? What are you down here for? And Mitch, this was like the first time that he didn't really communicate what was, like he was having a hard time communicating. And he kind of turned to his wife, and it was like he wanted to say something. He wanted to give her more information, but instead he just said, you know what, like he doesn't answer his question. He does not answer her question about why he's down there. He just says, I'm not feeling well, and so I'm not going to go to work today. I'm going to stay home. And so Kayla, she feels like, I haven't gotten an answer, but I guess the reason you're down here is because you're sick. You know, so be it. This is very uncharacteristic for him. He does not, you know, sleep downstairs. He doesn't take sick days. That's not a Mitch thing. But she's like, okay, you know, let me know if you need anything. I'll be gone for the day. Let me know if you need anything. And so she would go out. And then, many hours later, Kayla would come back with the kids, and she would be shocked to see that Mitch, well, first of all, she walks in the house, and the house is dark. The house is dark, and Mitch is still on the couch. He's just sitting there, the TV's not on, and he appears to be staring at the corner. And she looks in the corner, and the only light that is on in the house is this red lamp in the corner, which to Kayla is totally normal. It's just a red lamp in the corner. And she's looking at this lamp, she's looking at Mitch, and she's realizing, okay, clearly something is horribly wrong with my husband. And so she runs inside with the kids, and she's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm calling your doctor right now. Like, I'm calling your doctor. I don't know what's happening here, but something's off. Mitch doesn't respond. He can't even hear his wife. He's just focused on this lamp. He's been staring at the lamp the entire day, and he doesn't even know why. He's just staring at this lamp. And so while his wife, who he can't hear, he's not interacting with, is frantically calling, you know, doctors, you know, whoever she's calling to try to figure out what to do with her husband, the lamp begins to change again for Mitch. So it's upside down, it's blurry, but it began to grow. And so Mitch is staring at this lamp. He's fixed to the couch, and this lamp is just getting wider and wider and deeper and deeper. It's taking up the whole room until all Mitch can see is just this blurry red. It's like it's consuming him and everything in the room. And then suddenly it goes from this red blurry lamp that's eating everybody in the room to utter darkness. And then Mitch hears voices. He hears screaming. He hears yelling. And then Mitch opens his eyes, and he's looking around, and it's bright sunlight. He's on a college campus. It looks like a college campus. And all around him is just this ring of people that are young people that are looking down at him with their eyes wide and their hands over their mouths. And Mitch, he feels he's on the ground. He's on cement. He doesn't know how he got there. He feels this blinding pain in his head. And so he begins scanning the crowd. He's looking for his wife and his kids. He's got no idea what's going on. And before he can ask questions of these people who he doesn't recognize, a police officer comes storming into this circle of people around Mitch. And without saying anything, the officer runs to Mitch, scoops him up in his arms, and then runs out of the circle with him. And so Mitch is just being taken along. He doesn't know what's going on. The officer runs him back to his cruiser. He puts Mitch in the back seat. The officer hops in the driver's seat, and he speeds off. And so Mitch, I mean, he really has no sense of what's happening. He doesn't even know where he is. And so finally, he just blurts out to the officer, "What's going on?" And the officer would say, "You got attacked. You got attacked by someone on your campus. It was like a college football player. They hit you. You fell back. You were knocked unconscious, and you've been unconscious." And so, you know, Mitch doesn't recall this. He doesn't have any memory of being knocked out. And so instead of like reacting to what this officer has told him, he just says, "Well, where's my family? Where's my wife? Where's my kids?" And the officer would say, "I'm sorry, I don't know, but we have to get you to the hospital right now. You have a serious head injury." Well, it would turn out when Mitch got to the hospital that day, through process of you know, the doctors would discover after, you know, Mitch is asking all these questions about his family, that Mitch didn't have a family. Kayla and his kids never existed. Mitch had this super intense hallucination when in real life he had fallen and hit his head. When he was unconscious for 30 seconds to a minute, in that time, it's like an entire 10 years of life that Mitch believed he lived. It was visceral. It was his life. Happened in his mind only. Kayla never existed. His kids never existed. It was all a hallucination. It just never existed. And so Mitch, the reason we know about the story is because he wound up doing an Ask Me Anything on Reddit. He came out and talked about this experience, and he would come forward and he would say, you know, to people that don't understand what happened to me, it felt like I lost my family for real. It didn't feel like, oh, no big deal. You know, that never happened. No, I lived it. I had a wife. I had kids. And it's like they died, but I don't get to grieve them. And so for years and years, and probably still now, he had to go to therapy to learn how to grieve the loss of the family that never existed. And one of the more touching things, poignant things, sad things that he would say is he can't remember what his family looked like. He struggles to remember what they looked like. He remembers them, but he can't remember. But periodically, in his dreams, his son, his 5-year-old son, he's perpetually 5 years old, will come into his dream, and he'll recognize his son for a fleeting moment. But his son will start talking to him, and he can't hear what he's saying. And so that story chokes me up, to be honest, because the idea of losing your family is so horrible. And for it to happen like that, where you don't even get, you know, the world doesn't understand that situation, they can't process that. And so you're kind of just cast to the side as, well, it didn't really happen, but it did. And so that story's always stuck with me, more than most stories, I would say. But yeah, so that's the end of that one. That's a nice, incredibly sad story. So